Martha Bowen pressed her wedding ring into the pawnbroker's palm and watched the last piece of her husband disappear behind a glass counter. $3. That's what 10 years of marriage was worth in Denver, 1878. She didn't cry. She'd forgotten how. What she didn't know was that 200 miles away, a widowed rancher was writing a letter that would change everything, not just for her, but for 5 children who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. If you're watching from somewhere in this big world, drop your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit subscribe because Martha's journey is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss where it leads. The summer heat of Wyoming territory didn't care about grief or hunger, or the ache in a woman's bones from 3 days on a rattling wagon. It just pressed down relentless and honest, the way only the West could be. Martha Bowen. Maddie, to anyone who'd ever bothered to learn her name, sat on the wagon bench with her cast-iron skillet in her lap. Everything else was gone. The house in Denver. The savings her husband had promised would last. The job at Mrs. Pickering's boarding house that had kept her fed until the new owner decided he wanted someone younger, prettier, thinner behind his counter. Nothing personal, he'd said, not meeting her eyes. Just business. She'd nodded, packed her trunk, walked out with her spine straight and her heart cracking down the middle. That was 3 weeks ago. Now she was riding toward a ranch she'd never seen to work for a man she'd never met to care for children, whose names she'd memorized from a letter so short it might as well have been a telegram. Cook needed. 5 children. Hard work, fair pay. No questions asked. E. Cartwright, Dusty Creek Ranch. 23 words. She'd counted them 100 times on the journey, turning them over like worry stones, trying to read between the lines. The wagon driver, a leathery old man named Silas, who smelled like tobacco and horse sweat, glanced at her sideways. "You sure about this, ma'am?" "I'm sure I need work." "That ain't the same thing." He spat tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. "Cartwright's a hard man. Been harder since his wife passed. Folks in town say he don't talk, don't smile, don't do nothing but work himself half to death and ignore them kids of his. Then his children need someone." Silas shook his head. "His oldest boy, Caleb, he's wild as a Mustang and twice as mean. The girl tries to hold things together, but she's just a child herself. And the baby?" He stopped. Maddie waited. "The baby killed his mama coming into this world. Cartwright can barely look at him." Something cold settled in Maddie's chest. She knew about babies who came at too high a cost. She knew about the guilt that followed the way love and grief could twist together until you couldn't tell which was which. "How old?" she asked quietly. 14 months now. Little girl named Rosalie's been raising him more than anyone. 12 years old raising a baby." "Yes, ma'am." Maddie's hands tightened on the skillet. It was the only thing she'd refused to sell when everything else went. Her mother had given it to her, and her grandmother before that. 4 generations of women had cooked in this skillet, had fed their families, had survived. She would survive too. The ranch came into view as the sun started its slide toward the horizon. Dusty Creek, they called it, and the name fit. Everything looked parched, exhausted, held together by stubbornness, and not much else. A 2-story house that needed paint, a barn that needed repair, fences that sagged in places, and chickens, skinny, scraggly chickens, scratching at dirt so dry it puffed up in little clouds around their feet. But it was the silence that hit Maddie hardest. A house with 5 children should have noise, laughter, arguments, something. This place had nothing but the creak of the windmill and the distant lowing of cattle. Silas stopped the wagon in the yard and climbed down to unload her trunk. "Good luck, ma'am." He tipped his hat. "You're gonna need it." Before Maddie could respond, the front door banged open. A boy stood there, 15, maybe 16, with dark hair that hung in his eyes and a jaw set hard enough to cut glass. He looked at Maddie, the way you'd look at a coyote that wandered too close to the henhouse. "You the cook?" I'm Mrs. Bowen. Yes, I answered Mr. Cartwright's advertisement. Wasn't an advertisement. His voice was flat cold. Was a notice, because we got no choice. Maddie stepped down from the wagon, her boots raising dust. She was aware of the boy's eyes traveling over her, her broad shoulders, her thick waist, the body that had earned her mockery and dismissal her whole life. She waited for the comment. They always came. The boy just snorted. Kitchen's through the back. Pa's in the north pasture. Won't be back till dark. He turned to go. What's your name? He stopped but didn't turn around. Caleb. Caleb, I'm pleased to meet you. Now he turned, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. No, you ain't. Nobody's pleased about nothing in this house. Not for 14 months. So don't pretend different. He walked away, leaving Maddie standing in the dust with her trunk at her feet and her skillet still clutched to her chest. The inside of the house told the same story as the outside. Clean but hollow. Someone had scrubbed the floors and washed the dishes and folded the laundry, but they'd done it the way you'd clean a wound, mechanically, desperately, just trying to stop the bleeding. 4 children watched Maddie from various corners of the main room. A girl 12 years old with brown hair pulled back so tight it must have given her headaches. She stood near the staircase with a baby on her hip, a boy with dark curls and his father's jawline already forming in his round face. Twin boys, 9 or so, sat on the bottom step. Identical except for their expressions, one looked curious, the other terrified. And a little girl 5 at most, with blonde curls and enormous blue eyes hiding behind the older girl's skirt. I'm Mrs. Bowen, Maddie said, keeping her voice gentle. But you can call me Maddie if you like. Silence. The baby started fussing. The older girl bounced at him automatically, her thin arms straining with his weight. I'm Rosalie, she said finally. Rosie, this is Samuel. She gestured with her chin at the others. That's Pearl and Toby and Teddy. Which is which? Maddie asked the twins. They exchanged a look. The curious one grinned. I'm Toby, he's Teddy, but most folks can't tell. Toby's the one who's always talking. Teddy added quietly. I'm the one who ain't. Well, I'm pleased to meet all of you. Maddie set her skillet on the table. The children's eyes followed the movement. Has anyone eaten today? Another silence. This one felt different. Heavy. We had biscuits this morning, Rosie said carefully. I made them. That's a long time ago. You must be hungry. We're always hungry. It was Pearl who spoke, her small voice matter of fact. But there ain't much food. Pa forgot to go to town again. Maddie's jaw tightened. Forgot. That was one word for it. Well, she said, rolling up her sleeves, let's see what we can do about that. The kitchen was sparse but not empty. Flour, cornmeal, salt, pork beans, a few eggs, some dried apples. Not much, but enough for a woman who'd learned to make something from nothing in the lean years after her husband died. Maddie worked quickly, her hands remembering the motions, even when her mind wanted to wander. She built up the fire in the stove, mixed biscuit dough, started a pot of beans with salt pork and the last of the onions. One by one, the children drifted closer. First Pearl, clutching a rag doll with one button missing. She climbed onto a chair near the table and watched Maddie's hands move with wide, wondering eyes. Then the twins, pretending to be interested in something near the doorway, but really watching every move she made. Then, Rosie, still carrying Samuel, standing in the archway, like she was guarding the entrance to something precious. You can put him down, Maddie said without looking up. I won't hurt him. He cries if I put him down. Does he now? Maddie wiped her hands and turned to face them. May I hold him? Rosie's arms tightened reflexively. He don't like strangers. Most babies don't, but sometimes they surprise you. For a long moment, Rosie didn't move. Then slowly, she crossed the kitchen and placed Samuel in Maddie's arms. He was heavier than he should have been for Rosie to carry all day. His dark eyes studied Maddie's face with solemn intensity. She waited for the crying. Instead, he reached up and grabbed a strand of her hair that had escaped its pins. "Well?" Maddie said softly. "Hello there, little man." Samuel made a sound that might have been a laugh. Rosie's eyes went wide. He never what? He don't laugh. Not ever. Not since. She stopped, her face crumpling. Maddie freed her hair from Samuel's grip gently. "How long have you been taking care of him, Rosie?" "Since he was born?" The words came out thick, choked. "Mama died and Papa couldn't. He can't even look at Samuel, Mrs. Bowen. He acts like Samuel killed her. But Samuel was just a baby. He didn't mean to. He didn't know." The little girl started crying, silent tears streaming down her face, 14 months of grief and exhaustion breaking through the wall she'd built to hold it all back. Maddie did the only thing she could think of. She pulled Rosie close with her free arm, holding her and Samuel both, and let the child sob against her shoulder while the beans bubbled on the stove and the biscuits turned golden in the oven. "It's not your fault," Maddie murmured. "It's not Samuel's fault. It's nobody's fault. Sometimes terrible things just happen, and all we can do is keep going." "I'm so tired," Rosie whispered. "I'm so tired of keeping going." "I know, sweetheart. I know." The sun was setting when Maddie heard boots on the porch. She'd fed the children, all 5 of them, eating like they hadn't seen a proper meal in weeks, and gotten them settled in the main room. Samuel was asleep in a basket near the hearth. Pearl had crawled into Rosie's lap, and the twins were playing a quiet game of cards on the floor. Only Caleb was missing. He'd taken one look at the food Maddie put on the table, grabbed a biscuit, and disappeared back outside. The door opened. Elijah Cartwright was tall and lean, worn down to bone and sinew by work and grief. His dark hair was shot through with gray at the temples, and his eyes, gray-blue like storm clouds over mountains, held the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. He stopped in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room. Taking inventory, counting heads. When his eyes landed on Samuel's basket, something flickered across his face. Pain. Guilt. Something Maddie recognized, because she'd seen it in her own mirror for months after her miscarriages. He looked away quickly. "Mr. Cartwright." Maddie stood wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Martha Bowen. I've made supper." He nodded once, pulled off his hat, hung it on the peg by the door. "Children eat." "Yes, sir." "Good." He moved toward the basin to wash up his movements, mechanical empty. "You found the room off the kitchen." "I did." "That's yours. Stay out of the rest of the house unless you're cleaning it." Maddie's spine stiffened. "Understood. I don't need conversation. Don't need company. Don't need anyone thinking they can fix what's broken here." His voice was flat, scraped raw. "I need someone to cook and clean and keep these children fed, that's all. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Then we'll get along fine." He dried his hands and moved toward the table without looking at her. "I take my supper alone. The children might benefit from Mrs. Bowen." His voice cracked like a whip. "I said alone." Maddie watched him fill a plate and carry it out to the porch, letting the door swing shut behind him. The children hadn't moved. Their faces held no surprise, no disappointment, just the dull acceptance of people who'd learned to expect nothing and still managed to be let down. Rosie's voice was barely a whisper. "He's been like this since Mama died." "I see that. He loved her so much. I think—" The girl swallowed hard. "I think he blames himself. For being out in the fields when she went into labor. For not being there when—" "Rosie." Maddie knelt down so she was eye level with the girl. "That's a heavy thing to carry. Your father's grief. His guilt. It's not yours to hold. Someone has to. No. Someone has to keep this family fed and clean and together until your father finds his way back. But that's not the same as carrying his pain. Maddie brushed a strand of hair from Rosie's face. You've done an incredible job holding things together. Now let me help. Rosie's lip trembled. You won't stay. Nobody stays. I'm not nobody. Maddie stood up, her knees creaking in protest. Now let's get these dishes cleaned up and everyone ready for bed. Later, after the children were settled upstairs and the kitchen was scrubbed clean, Maddie stood at the window of her small room and watched the lamplight glowing in the barn. Elijah Cartwright had retreated there after supper, as Silas had warned he would. Running from his children, running from the baby who looked too much like the wife he'd lost, running from everything except work, because work was the only thing that didn't demand he feel. She understood. God help her, she understood. When Thomas died cave-in at the mine 3 days before she was supposed to tell him about the baby that never came, she'd wanted to run too. Had wanted to disappear into work and routine and the mechanical business of staying alive because feeling meant drowning. But she hadn't had children depending on her. She'd only had herself, and herself was easy to neglect. These children didn't have that luxury. Maddie touched the cold glass of the window, watching the distant lamplight flicker. I don't know what I'm doing here, she said quietly to no one, to herself. To the ghost of her husband she sometimes imagined was still listening. I don't know if I can help them. The house settled around her, creaking and sighing in the summer heat. And from somewhere upstairs she heard a small voice crying. Samuel waking in the night, calling for a mother who would never come. She was moving before she made the conscious decision to go. The baby's room was small, barely more than a closet, with a crib pushed against one wall, and a rocking chair that had clearly been moved in recently. The moonlight through the tiny window turned everything silver and shadow. Samuel stood in his crib, his small hands gripping the rails, tears streaming down his round face. When he saw Maddie in the doorway, he lifted his arms, reaching. She picked him up without hesitation. He was warm and solid and smelled like baby milk and powder and something sweet underneath. He pressed his face against her shoulder and hiccuped, his crying already slowing. There now, Maddie murmured, settling into the rocking chair. There now, you're not alone. She rocked him slowly, humming a tune her mother used to sing, something about rivers and mountains and coming home. Samuel's breathing evened out. His small fist curled into her nightgown and held on. You're a good boy, she told him softly. You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? Not one thing. He was asleep within minutes, but Maddie kept rocking. It felt too good to stop this weight in her arms, this life she could nurture and protect. She'd lost 2 babies of her own. Had buried those tiny possibilities before they ever had a chance to become real. But this baby was real. This baby was here, and he needed someone. I'll stay, she whispered to him, making a promise she had no right to make. I'll stay as long as you need me. She didn't know that Elijah Cartwright was standing in the hallway just outside the door listening. Didn't know that he'd come in from the barn when he heard Samuel crying the way he always did, only to stop outside the nursery and hear a stranger singing his son to sleep. Didn't know that for the first time in 14 months, he felt something crack open in his chest, not healing, not yet, but the first tiny fissure in the wall he'd built around his heart. He walked away before she could see him, but he didn't go back to the barn. The first week passed in a blur of cooking and cleaning and small victories. Maddie learned the rhythms of the house: who ate what, who needed what, who could be trusted with which tasks. She learned that Toby would eat anything you put in front of him, but Teddy was particular about textures. That Pearl loved apple pandowdy but hated raisins. That Rosie couldn't sleep unless someone checked on her at least once after dark. She learned that Caleb avoided her like she carried plague, taking his meals outside, answering questions with grunts, disappearing into the far pastures to work alongside his father. And she learned that Elijah Cartwright was exactly as difficult as advertised. He took his meals alone, spoke only when necessary, came in after dark and left before dawn. When he passed Samuel's cradle, his jaw would tighten and his eyes would slide away as if looking at his own child caused him physical pain. But he was watching her. Maddie could feel it, those storm-gray eyes tracking her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. Assessing. Judging. Waiting maybe for her to fail so he could confirm what he'd already decided, that nothing and no one could put his family back together. She didn't intend to fail. On Saturday morning, 8 days after her arrival, Maddie decided it was time to go to town. "We need supplies," she told Rosie, who had become her unofficial second-in-command. "Sugar, coffee, flour. And these children need clothes that fit. Pa handles the supplies." "Your pa," Maddie said carefully, "has forgotten the last 3 weeks. I saw the ledger." Rosie's cheeks flushed. "He's been busy." "I know he has. That's why I'm going instead." She untied her apron and hung it on the hook. "You're in charge while I'm gone. Think you can manage the boys and Pearl for a few hours?" "I've been managing them for 14 months, Mrs. Bowen." "I know you have." Maddie cupped the girl's face in her hands. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore. Remember that." She hitched the wagon herself, one skill Thomas had insisted she learn before he'd let her marry him, and set off for Copper Springs with Samuel in a basket beside her. She wasn't about to leave that baby alone in a house where his own father couldn't look at him. Copper Springs was a typical Western town, one main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a few scattered buildings that served as doctor's office, sheriff's station, and blacksmith shop. Maddie pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and climbed down, lifting Samuel's basket carefully. She was reaching for the door when it swung open and nearly hit her in the face. A woman emerged, middle-aged, expensively dressed, with a face that looked like it had been pinched too hard at birth and never quite recovered. "Well?" The woman's eyes swept over Maddie with undisguised contempt. "You must be the Cartwright housekeeper." "I'm Mrs. Bowen, and you are Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore." She said it the way you'd say queen or president, with the full expectation that the name meant something. "My husband owns the largest ranch in the territory." "How nice for him." Mrs. Whitmore's nostrils flared. "I've heard about you, Mrs. Bowen. The whole town has. A widow moving into a widower's house." Her voice dripped acid. "I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation." "There is. It's called employment." "Is that what they're calling it now?" Mrs. Whitmore's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "A woman of your proportions. I suppose you take what you can get." The words landed like a slap. Maddie felt her face heat, felt the old familiar shame creeping up from the place she'd tried to bury it. But before she could respond, a hand landed on her shoulder. "Adelaide." The voice was male warm and carried the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I believe you were leaving." Mrs. Whitmore's expression shifted, still contemptuous, but now threaded with something like wariness. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't see you." "Clearly." A man stepped around Maddie, positioning himself between her and his wife. He was handsome in a weathered way, with silver-shot hair and eyes that were probably charming when they weren't hard with disapproval. "Go wait in the carriage, Adelaide. I'll be along shortly." She went, but not without shooting Maddie a look that promised this wasn't over. The man turned to face her, and his expression transformed, warming into something that was probably meant to be friendly, but felt too practiced to be real. "Mrs. Bowen, I'm Cornelius Whitmore. Please accept my apologies for my wife's behavior." "Apologies accepted." Maddie's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She tightened her grip on Samuel's basket. "Now if you'll excuse me." "You're working for Eli Cartwright." It wasn't a question. "I am." "I knew his wife." Something flickered in Whitmore's eyes, something that looked almost like grief, but darker. "Anna. We grew up together. I was devastated when she passed." "I'm sure Mr. Cartwright appreciates your sympathy." "Does he?" Whitmore smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Eli and I have never been close. He got the woman I wanted, and I got He gestured vaguely toward the carriage where his wife waited. Well, Maddie didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know why this stranger was telling her things that felt too intimate for a chance meeting on a boardwalk. That ranch is struggling, Whitmore continued. Eli's too proud to admit it, but I've seen the signs. Fences falling, cattle thinning. A man who loved his land would never let it get that bad. Mr. Cartwright is working through his grief. That's all. Is it? Whitmore leaned closer, lowering his voice. Or is he drowning and taking those children down with him? 5 motherless children, Mrs. Bowen, and a man who's given up on life. Someone should do something. Someone is me. Whitmore studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed a sound that should have been pleasant, but somehow wasn't. You're not what I expected, he said. Adelaide made you sound like, well, never mind what Adelaide said. I think you might be exactly what that household needs. He tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Bowen. I'm sure we'll speak again. He walked away, leaving Maddie standing on the boardwalk with a sleeping baby, and the uncomfortable feeling that she'd just been measured for something she didn't understand. She got her supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, fabric for clothes, and started back toward the ranch just as the afternoon sun began its descent. But Whitmore's words kept circling in her mind. A man who's given up on life, taking those children down with him. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. Elijah Cartwright was difficult and distant and drowning in grief, but he hadn't given up. You didn't work from dawn to dusk if you'd given up. You didn't hire help for your children if you'd given up. Did you? The wagon crested the ridge above Dusty Creek Ranch, and Maddie pulled the horses to a stop, looking down at the spread below. From up here, she could see it all. The house with its peeling paint. The barn with its sagging roof. The fences that needed mending, and the fields that needed tending, and the 100 small signs of a place that was trying so hard just to survive. And there in the yard, she could see Elijah Cartwright kneeling in the dust. Caleb stood over him, fists clenched at his sides. Even from this distance, Maddie could hear the boy shouting, not the words, but the fury behind them. She clicked to the horses and started down the hill at a pace that made her teeth rattle. By the time she reached the yard, Caleb had stormed off toward the barn. Elijah was still on his knees, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with something that might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. Maddie climbed down from the wagon and walked toward him slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. Mr. Cartwright. He didn't look up. Go inside, Mrs. Bowen. What happened? Nothing that concerns you. It concerns me if it concerns those children. His head came up at that, and she saw his face clearly for the first time since she'd arrived. Not just tired, not just grieving, broken. The pieces barely held together by pride and stubbornness, and the knowledge that falling apart completely wasn't an option. Caleb found his mother's grave. Elijah said, his voice scraping like rust. Someone dug it up, stole her wedding ring off her hand. Maddie's stomach turned. Who would? I don't know. His hands curled into fists against his thighs. But Caleb thinks I should. Thinks I should have been protecting her grave the way I couldn't protect her. A laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Maybe he's right. He's a grieving boy who doesn't know where to put his anger. He's a boy who lost his mother and got stuck with a father who can't even look at his own baby. Elijah finally met her eyes, and the pain in his gaze was staggering. What kind of man can't love his own child, Mrs. Bowen? Maddie was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down in the dust beside him, her skirts spreading around her, and said something she'd never told another living soul. I lost 2 babies before they were ever born. My body couldn't hold them. She stared at the horizon, not at him. After the second one, I couldn't look at children at all. Couldn't see a mother with a baby without feeling like my heart was being carved out with a dull knife. My husband Thomas, he wanted to try again, wanted to believe we could have a family." She swallowed hard. "I was so relieved when he died. Relieved I wouldn't have to disappoint him again." "What kind of woman is relieved when her husband dies?" Silence stretched between them. Then Elijah said very quietly, "The kind who's been carrying too much pain for too long." Maddie finally looked at him. "So are you, Mr. Cartwright. So is Caleb. So is every person in that house. I don't know how to put it down." "Neither do I." She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "But I think maybe we figure it out together. Or we don't figure it out at all." She offered him her hand. He stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly he took it and let her pull him to his feet. "Samuel laughed yesterday," she said. "Did you know that first time since he was born, according to Rosie?" Something shifted in Elijah's face. Fear, hope, pain. All of it tangled together until she couldn't tell where one ended and another began. "I can't." "You can. Not today, maybe. But someday." She released his hand and stepped back. "Now come inside. Supper's waiting, and your children need to see you eat with them. Just once. That's all I'm asking. Just once." He looked at the house. At the barn where Caleb had disappeared. At the grave site in the distance where his wife's rest had been violated. Then he looked at Maddie, this plain, sturdy woman who'd walked into his broken household and refused to be frightened away, and he nodded. "Just once," he said. It was a start. That first family supper changed something. Not everything. Not enough. But something. Elijah sat at the head of the table, with his shoulders rigid and his jaw tight, eating mechanically, while his children stole glances at him like he might disappear if they looked too long. He didn't speak, didn't smile. But he stayed. And when Pearl asked him to pass the biscuits, he did it without flinching. Maddie counted that as a victory. The days that followed settled into a cautious rhythm. Elijah still retreated to the barn. Most nights still avoided Samuel's cradle like it contained something poisonous. But he started coming to breakfast. Started nodding at Maddie when he passed her in the hall. Started saying thank you when she set his plate in front of him. Small things. Tiny things. But Maddie had learned that healing happened in inches, not miles. Caleb was another matter entirely. The boy had barely spoken since the day his mother's grave was desecrated. He worked alongside his father from dawn to dusk, his face closed and hard, his movements sharp with barely contained fury. When Maddie tried to talk to him, he walked away. When she saved him a plate of food, he left it untouched. "He blames himself," Rosie told her one evening while they washed dishes. "For not protecting Mama's grave. For not being there. He was a child when she died. He couldn't have. Don't matter what he could or couldn't do." Rosie scrubbed a pot with more force than necessary. "Caleb's been trying to be a man since he was 14. Trying to fill a hole that's too big for anyone to fill. And every time he fails, he just gets angrier. At himself. At everything." Rosie set the pot down and looked at Maddie with eyes too old for her 12 years. "But mostly at Pa, for leaving us. For being here but not being here. You know." Maddie knew. She knew it better than she wanted to admit. 2 weeks after her arrival, the heat broke every record anyone could remember. The creek that gave the ranch its name slowed to a trickle. The well water dropped lower every day. And the cattle, already thin from a hard winter, started dying. Elijah rode out before dawn and came back after dark, his face gray with exhaustion, and something that looked like defeat. He stopped coming to breakfast, stopped nodding at Maddie in the hall, stopped saying thank you. He was disappearing again, retreating into work and silence, and Maddie didn't know how to pull him back. "We're losing them," he said one night, his voice flat and hollow. Maddie had found him on the porch, staring at nothing, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. "The cattle, lost 6 more today. If this drought don't break soon, it will." "You don't know that," No, she admitted. I don't. But I know giving up won't make it rain any faster. He laughed a sound with no humor in it. You always this optimistic, Mrs. Bowen. I'm not optimistic. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but something close to recognition. Anna used to say that, he said quietly. That stubbornness was just hope wearing work boots. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife's name to her. Maddie held very still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had loosened his tongue. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. His voice cracked. She was everything, and I let her die. You didn't. I was in the north pasture when she went into labor. She sent Caleb to fetch me, but I was too far. By the time I got back... He stopped, his hands shaking. By the time I got back, the midwife was holding Samuel and Anna was... She was already... He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Maddie sat down beside him on the porch step, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The last thing she said to me, Elijah continued, his voice barely a whisper, was, "Promise me you'll love him." She knew something was wrong, knew she wasn't going to make it. And she spent her last breath begging me to love the baby who was killing her. Did you promise? Yes. The word came out strangled. And I've broken that promise every single day since. Maddie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Promises to the dead are the hardest to keep. They can't forgive us when we fail. They can't remind us why we made them in the first place." Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to remind you that you're human. She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. Samuel doesn't need a perfect father, Mr. Cartwright. He just needs one who tries. She went inside before he could respond, but she heard him stay on that porch for another hour, and when he finally came in, he stopped outside Samuel's room. He didn't go in, but he stopped, and Maddie counted that as another inch. The trouble came 3 days later, wearing a fancy dress and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore arrived at Dusty Creek Ranch in a carriage that probably cost more than everything Maddie owned combined. She stepped out like she was gracing them with her presence, her eyes sweeping over the house with undisguised contempt. "Mrs. Bowen," she said Maddie's name like it tasted sour. "I've come to see the children." "The children?" "Word in town is they're being neglected, living in squalor while their father drinks himself to death and his hired woman..." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Well, the ladies' auxiliary felt someone should check on their welfare." Maddie's hands curled into fists at her sides. "The children are fine. They're fed, clothed, and cared for." "By you." Mrs. Whitmore's smile widened. "A stranger. A widow of questionable reputation. A woman who's moved into a widower's home and taken charge of his children like she has some right to them." "I have every right. I was hired." Hired. The word dripped with insinuation. "Is that what we're calling it?" Before Maddie could respond, the door behind her opened. Rosie stepped onto the porch. Samuel on her hip, her small face set in lines of fierce determination. "Mrs. Bowen ain't done nothing wrong," the girl said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "She takes care of us better than anyone since Mama died. She makes sure we eat. She holds Samuel when he cries. Child, this doesn't concern you." "It does concern me." Rosie lifted her chin. "You're talking about my family, my home, and you're lying about Mrs. Bowen, and I won't let you." Mrs. Whitmore's face went red. "How dare you speak to me that way? Your mother would be ashamed." "Don't!" Maddie stepped forward, putting herself between Rosie and Mrs. Whitmore. "Don't you ever speak about their mother." "I'll speak about whatever I please. Unlike some people, I have standing in this community. I have influence. And when I tell people what I've seen here today, a hired woman letting children talk back to their betters, a household in disarray, a father who can't be bothered to, that's enough." Elijah's voice cut through the air like a blade. He'd come around the corner of the house, his clothes dusty from work, his face tight with controlled fury. He walked toward them slowly, deliberately, each step weighted with warning. "Adelaide," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get off my property." "Eli, I know what you were doing, same thing you've been doing since we were children. Stirring up trouble because it makes you feel important." He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to intimidate, far enough to maintain a thin veneer of courtesy. "My children are cared for. My house is clean. My hired help is beyond reproach. And if I hear one word of gossip, one whisper about Mrs. Bowen or my family, I will know exactly where it came from." Mrs. Whitmore's face had gone from red to white. "Cornelius won't stand for this." "Cornelius can come discuss it with me himself if he has concerns. But you," Elijah's voice dropped lower, "you stay away from my children, stay away from my home, and stay away from Mrs. Bowen. We clear?" She gathered her skirts and swept toward her carriage without another word. But the look she shot over her shoulder promised retribution. When the carriage disappeared down the road, Rosie let out a shaky breath. "Pa, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have talked back, but she was saying such awful things and I couldn't just—" "You did right." Elijah put his hand on her head, a gesture so unexpected that Rosie's eyes went wide. "You defended your family. That's never wrong." He looked at Maddie then, and something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or understanding. The acknowledgement of allies in a battle neither of them had asked to fight. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing up to her, for protecting Rosie. I was hired to care for your children. That includes protecting them from busybodies with too much time on their hands." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "You're a stubborn woman, Mrs. Bowen." "So I've been told." He nodded once and walked back toward the barn, but this time his shoulders seemed slightly less burdened. That night, Maddie couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Mrs. Whitmore's words in her head. "A woman of your proportions. Hired woman. Questionable reputation." The insults weren't new. She'd heard variations of them her whole life from her mother-in-law, who'd called her sturdy stock, in a tone that made it sound like a disease from the boarding house owner who'd replaced her with someone prettier from every mirror she'd ever looked into. She knew she wasn't beautiful. Knew her body was built for work, not admiration. Knew that men didn't look at her the way they looked at slender women with delicate features and graceful movements. But knowing it and feeling it were different things. She got up and stood at the window, looking out at the barn where a light still glowed. Elijah was out there, working or brooding, or both. Running from his bed the way he ran from everything that required feeling. What would it be like? She wondered to be someone worth running toward, instead of someone easy to overlook. A soft sound made her turn. Samuel was awake in the basket she'd moved to her room. She couldn't bear the thought of him crying alone while everyone else slept. His dark eyes found hers in the moonlight, and he reached up his arms. She lifted him against her chest and felt his small fingers curl into her nightgown. "You don't care what I look like, do you?" she murmured. "You just care that I'm here." Samuel made a sound that might have been agreement. "That's enough for now," she told him, rocking gently. "That's enough." But deep down, she wasn't sure it would ever be enough. The gossip started the next day. Maddie found out when she went to town for supplies. The general store fell silent when she walked in. Women whispered behind their hands. Men avoided her eyes. Mrs. Prescott, who ran the store, was the only one willing to speak to her directly. "I don't believe a word of it," she said firmly, counting out Maddie's change. "Adelaide Whitmore is a venomous snake, always has been. But she's got friends, Mrs. Bowen. Powerful friends. And she's telling everyone who'll listen that you've bewitched Eli Cartwright, that you're after his land, that you've—" She lowered her voice. "That you've taken liberties no decent woman would take." Maddie's stomach turned. "None of that is true." "I know it ain't. Anyone with sense knows it ain't. But sense is in short supply around here, especially when there's scandal to chew on." Mrs. Prescott leaned closer. Watch your back, honey, and watch those children. Adelaide's already talking about sending someone from the county to check on their welfare. She can't do that. She can try, and Cornelius will back her up. He's been wanting Eli's land for years, says it blocks access to his northern pastures. If he can prove Eli's unfit to raise those children, he's not unfit, he's grieving. Same thing to some folks. Mrs. Prescott patted her hand. You've got friends here too, Mrs. Bowen. Don't forget that. But be careful. The Whitmores play dirty. Maddie drove back to the ranch with her mind racing. She had to tell Elijah, had to warn him about what was coming. But how? He was barely holding himself together as it was. One more weight might break him completely. She was still wrestling with the decision when she pulled into the yard and found Caleb waiting for her. He stood by the barn, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. We need to talk, he said. Maddie climbed down from the wagon, her heart pounding. About what? About why you're really here. I'm here to work, you know that. Do I? He stepped closer, his young face hard with suspicion. I know you showed up out of nowhere right when Pa was at his lowest. I know you wormed your way into this house, into my brothers' and sisters' hearts. I know Pa looks at you different than he looked at anyone since Ma died. Caleb? And I know Cornelius Whitmore came by yesterday while you were all dealing with his wife. He talked to me, told me things. Maddie's blood ran cold. What things? That you're a fraud, that you got fired from your last job for stealing, that you're only here because you're after Pa's land, and once you get him to marry you, you'll sell it to the highest bidder and leave us all with nothing. None of that is true. He showed me papers. Caleb's voice cracked. A letter from a Mrs. Pickering in Denver saying you were dismissed for theft. A document showing you owe money to half the merchants in the territory. Those papers are lies, Caleb. Whitmore forged them. Why would he do that? Because he wants your father's land. Because... She stopped, remembering what Whitmore had told her that day on the boardwalk. I got the woman I wanted, and I got well. Because he wanted your mother, and your father got her instead, and he's never forgiven either of them for it. Caleb's face went pale. That's not Ma wouldn't. Your mother chose your father, loved your father. That's all that matters. Maddie stepped toward him, willing him to believe her. Whitmore is using you, Caleb, using your grief and your anger to turn you against the people who care about you. Nobody cares about me. That's not true. Pa barely looks at me. He barely looks at any of us. He just works and pretends we don't exist because existing means remembering that Ma's gone and it's... His voice broke. It's all my fault. What? I was supposed to get him. Tears were streaming down Caleb's face now, all the rage and grief finally breaking through. When Ma went into labor, she sent me to the north pasture to fetch Pa. But I was scared. I'd never ridden that far alone. And I got lost, Mrs. Bowen. I got lost, and by the time I found him, by the time we got back... Oh, Caleb. If I'd been faster, if I hadn't been such a coward, Ma would still be alive, and Samuel wouldn't be here, and Pa would still love us, and everything would be... Maddie pulled him into her arms. He fought it for half a second, this angry boy who'd been trying so hard to be a man. Then he collapsed against her, sobbing, with the abandon of a child who'd been carrying an impossible weight for far too long. It wasn't your fault, she said fiercely, holding him tight. It was never your fault. You were 14 years old, and you did your best, and sometimes our best isn't enough. But that doesn't make it our fault. Do you hear me? I should have been faster. You should have been a child who didn't have to carry his family's survival on his shoulders. You should have been protected, not protector. She pulled back, cupping his tear-stained face in her hands. Your mother didn't die because of you. She died because sometimes women die in childbirth, and it's terrible, and it's unfair, and it's nobody's fault. Not yours, not Samuel's, not your father's, nobody's. Caleb's whole body shook with sobs. Pa hates Samuel. Your pa is scared. Scared that loving Samuel means accepting that your mother is gone. Scared that if he lets himself feel anything, he'll fall apart completely. She wiped the tears from his cheeks. But he doesn't hate Samuel. And he doesn't hate you. He's just lost Caleb. Same as all of you. Same as me. You're not lost. I am. I've been lost for years, but I'm trying to find my way back. And so is your father, even if he doesn't know how yet. She released his face and stepped back. Whitmore is lying to you. I don't know how he got those forged papers, but I swear on your mother's grave that I've never stolen anything in my life. I'm not after your father's land. I'm not after anything except a place to belong. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his chest still heaving. Then he said, "He wanted me to help him. Whitmore. Wanted me to spy on you, report back anything I could use against you. And will you?" "No." He wiped his face with his sleeve, his jaw setting with the same stubborn determination she'd seen in his father. "Ma wouldn't want me working with a man like that, and you—" He swallowed hard. "You're good to my brothers and sisters, good to Samuel. You didn't have to be, but you are." "Thank you, Caleb." "Don't thank me yet." He looked toward the house where his siblings were probably watching from the windows. "Whitmore's not going to give up. He told me he's got plans, big plans. Said by the end of summer, this ranch would be his, whether Pa liked it or not." "Did he say how?" "No, but he smiled when he said it, like he already knew he'd won." Maddie's blood ran cold. "Then we'd better make sure he's wrong." She told Elijah that night. All of it. The gossip in town, the forged papers, Whitmore's visit to Caleb, the threat against the ranch. She told him while he sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands and his coffee going cold in front of him. When she finished, the silence stretched so long she thought he might not respond at all. Then he said, "I should have known." "Known what?" "That Cornelius would never let it go. That he'd find some way to take everything from me." Elijah raised his head and his eyes were hollow. "He loved Anna. Did you know that asked her to marry him 3 times before I worked up the courage to even speak to her? When she chose me?" He shook his head. He smiled at our wedding. Congratulated me, shook my hand. But his eyes were dead, Mrs. Bowen. Dead and waiting. Waiting for what? For me to fail. For me to prove I wasn't worthy of her. His voice dropped. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't. That's not true. Isn't it? He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I couldn't save her. I can't even look at our son. I've let this ranch fall apart. Let my children raise themselves. Let everything Anna loved turn to dust and ruin. He laughed bitterly. Cornelius probably thinks he'd have done better. And maybe he would have. Cornelius Whitmore is a man who forges documents and manipulates children to get what he wants. Maddie stood too, facing him across the table. That's not love. That's obsession. And your wife knew the difference, which is why she chose you. She chose wrong. She chose a man who loved her so much he can barely survive without her. A man who works himself to exhaustion, trying to provide for his children, even when he can't bear to be in the same room with them. A man who is so consumed by guilt and grief that he's drowning, but who still— Her voice cracked. Who still came running when he heard his son crying. Who still defended me against Adelaide Whitmore. Who still, despite everything, gives a damn about something other than himself. Elijah stared at her. You're not unworthy, Elijah Cartwright. You're just broken. And broken things can be mended. Can they? I have to believe that. She pressed her palm flat against the table. Because if they can't, then what's the point? Why get up every morning? Why feed the children and mend the clothes and plant seeds in ground that might not grow anything? Why keep trying when trying hurts so much? Why do you? The question stopped her. She thought about her husband buried in a Denver cemetery she'd never see again. About the babies she'd lost before they ever took a breath. About the boarding house owner who'd looked at her body with disgust, and decided she wasn't worth keeping. "Because my mother gave me a skillet," she said finally, "and she told me that as long as I could cook, I could survive. That my worth wasn't in how I looked or who wanted me, but in what I could do." She met his eyes. "I've been surviving for a long time, Mr. Cartwright. But lately, these past few weeks, I've started to remember what it feels like to actually live." Something shifted in his face. Something raw and desperate and almost hopeful. "Maddie," he said, her first name soft on his lips. "Elijah." They stood there, the table between them, the lantern flickering, the house breathing around them, with the sounds of sleeping children and settling wood. Then a cry split the night. Caleb's voice from outside. "Papa, the barn!" Elijah was moving before Maddie registered what was happening. She ran after him, her heart pounding her mind, racing with every terrible possibility. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the eastern wall, orange and hungry, spreading faster than seemed possible. Smoke billowed into the night sky, blotting out the stars. The horses were screaming, trapped inside. "The horses!" Caleb was already running toward the barn doors. "Pa, we have to get them out." "Wait." Elijah grabbed his son's arm. "It's too dangerous. They'll die. You might die." Elijah's grip tightened. "I won't lose you too. Pa, I'll go." Maddie was already moving, pulling her shawl over her mouth and nose. "The children need both of you." "Maddie, no." But she was already at the barn door, already yanking it open, already plunging into smoke and heat and chaos. Inside, she could barely see. The horses thrashed in their stalls, terrified. The fire was spreading, eating through dry hay and old wood with terrifying speed. She found the first stall by feel wrenched. It opened, slapped the mare's flank until the animal bolted toward the door. Then the second stall. The third. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed. The heat pressed against her skin like a living thing. One more horse. The stallion. Elijah's best breeder, worth more than everything else on the ranch combined. She found his stall through the smoke, but the latch was stuck, warped by heat. She pulled and yanked and screamed in frustration while the flames crept closer. "Move!" Elijah's voice, his hands on her shoulders, shoving her aside. He slammed his shoulder against the stall door, once, twice, 3 times. The wood splintered. The stallion burst free, nearly trampling them both. "Come on." Elijah grabbed her hand. "Now!" They ran. Behind them, the roof groaned. They made it through the door, just as the barn collapsed in on itself, a fountain of sparks and flames, shooting into the night sky. Maddie fell to her knees in the dirt, coughing, gasping alive. Elijah dropped beside her, his hand still gripping hers like he was afraid to let go. "You fool," he said hoarsely. "You damned stubborn, brave fool." The horses. All out. All safe. He cupped her face in his hands, tilting it toward the firelight, checking for injuries. "You could have died." "But I didn't." "But you could have." His voice cracked. "You ran into a burning barn for horses that aren't even yours, for a family that isn't—" He stopped. Maddie looked at him, this broken, stubborn, beautiful man, and said, "This family is mine, whether anyone says so or not." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, smearing soot and tears. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think maybe it is." Behind them, the barn burned down to ash and embers. But something else, something fragile and new, was just beginning to catch fire. The smoke hung heavy in the air for days. Maddie woke each morning with it in her lungs, in her hair, in the fabric of every dress she owned. The children walked around in a daze, their eyes red-rimmed and hollow, watching the place where the barn used to stand, like they expected it to rebuild itself through sheer force of wanting. But it was Elijah who worried her most. He'd retreated again. Not to the barn, there was no barn now, but somewhere inside himself, where she couldn't reach him. He worked from dawn to dusk, clearing rubble, salvaging what little could be saved, his face a mask of grim determination that hid whatever was churning underneath. 3 days after the fire, Sheriff Tom Barlow rode out to the ranch. Maddie watched from the porch as Elijah met him in the yard, their conversation too quiet to hear but loud in body language. Elijah's shoulders going rigid, his hands curling into fists. The sheriff reaching out to steady him, then stepping back when Elijah shook him off. When the sheriff rode away, Elijah stood motionless for a long moment. Then he walked toward the house. "Inside," he said as he passed Maddie. "Family meeting." The children gathered in the main room with the speed of people who'd learned that when Pa used that tone, you didn't argue. Rosie held Samuel on her lap. The twins sat pressed together on the floor. Pearl climbed onto Caleb's lap, her small fingers twisted in his shirt. Elijah stood by the cold hearth, his face gray with soot and exhaustion. "Sheriff found evidence," he said flatly. The fire was set. Someone poured kerosene along the east wall and lit it. Rosie gasped. The twins exchanged frightened looks. "Who?" Caleb's voice was hard. "Who would?" "We don't know for certain." "But you suspect." Maddie stepped forward. "You suspect Whitmore." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I suspect. But suspecting and proving are different things. Whitmore's got friends in town, money to throw around, influence with folks who matter. Sheriff says without a witness or solid evidence there's nothing he can do. So he just gets away with it." Caleb was on his feet, Pearl sliding to the floor. "He burns down our barn, tries to destroy everything we have, and nobody's going to—" "I didn't say that." Elijah's voice cut through his son's anger. "I said the law can't touch him. That's not the same as nobody doing anything." "Eli." Maddie's heart clenched. "What are you planning?" "What I should have done months ago." He looked at her, and his eyes held a fire that matched the one that had taken his barn. "I'm going to face him, man to man, and I'm going to end this. He'll kill you." The words came out before Maddie could stop them. "A man like Whitmore, with his money and his hired hands. Then he kills me." Elijah's voice was terrifyingly calm. "But at least my children will know their father didn't just lie down and let someone take everything from them." "Pa, no." Rosie's voice cracked. "We already lost Mama. We can't lose you too." Something flickered in Elijah's face. Pain. Doubt. The weight of 6 children depending on him when he could barely hold himself together. "You won't lose me," he said quietly. "I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep." It was Caleb who spoke, his young voice old with grief. "Ma made promises too." The silence that followed was devastating. Elijah looked at his oldest son, really looked at him, and whatever he saw there made something crack in his expression. "You're right," he said hoarsely. "I can't promise I won't die. I can't promise anything will be okay. But I can promise this." He moved toward Caleb, stopping just close enough to reach out if either of them had the courage. "I'm done hiding. I'm done running. I'm done being half a father because being a whole one hurts too much." Caleb's chin trembled. "Pa." "I'm sorry, son. For everything. For not being there when you needed me. For making you carry burdens no child should carry. For—" his voice broke. "For letting you think any of what happened to your mother was your fault. I should have been faster. If I hadn't gotten lost. You were 14 years old riding alone through country you'd barely seen. You did everything right. The only person who failed that day was me." Elijah's hand came up, hesitated, then landed on Caleb's shoulder. "I was too far away. I was always too far away. That's my sin to carry, not yours." Caleb broke. He collapsed against his father, sobbing the way he hadn't since the day they'd buried his mother. Elijah wrapped his arms around him and held on both of them, shaking both of them, finally, letting the grief they'd been choking on for 14 months pour out. Maddie gathered the other children close, shielding them from the raw intimacy of the moment while also letting them witness it. This was what healing looked like. Ugly and painful, and absolutely necessary. When Caleb finally pulled back, his face was wet, but his eyes were clearer than Maddie had ever seen them. I want to come with you, he said. When you face Whitmore. No. Pa, this isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't. Caleb's jaw set, with the same stubborn determination as his father. He tried to use me against you. Fed me lies about Mrs. Bowen, tried to turn me into his spy. I've got my own score to settle. Elijah studied his son for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. All right. But you follow my lead. And if things go bad, you run. You get back here, and you protect your brothers and sisters. Understood. Understood. Then we ride at dawn. That night, Maddie couldn't sleep. She sat in the rocking chair in her small room, Samuel, drowsing in her arms, and watched the moon track across the sky through her window. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every whisper of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. A soft knock at her door made her heart stutter. It's me. Elijah's voice barely above a whisper. She set Samuel in his basket and opened the door. Elijah stood in the hallway, his hair damp from washing his face pale in the moonlight. He looked younger somehow, stripped of the armor he usually wore. Can't sleep, he said. Neither can I. Can I? He stopped, started again. Would you sit with me? On the porch, I don't want to be alone tonight. She followed him outside. They sat on the steps, side by side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The night was warm and quiet, the stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Anna used to love nights like this, Elijah said softly. She'd drag me out here and make me name all the constellations, even though I could never remember them right. What would she say about tomorrow? She'd tell me I was being a damn fool. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She'd say violence never solved anything, that I should try talking first, that there had to be another way. And what would you say back? That some men don't understand talk, that Cornelius Whitmore has been circling my family like a vulture for 15 years, waiting for his chance to take what he couldn't have. Elijah's voice hardened. He wanted Anna. She chose me. And he's been punishing me for it ever since. Maybe he loved her. No. Men like Whitmore don't love. They covet, they possess, they destroy what they can't have. He turned to look at her. He's not doing this because he mourns Anna. He's doing this because I got something he wanted, and he can't stand to see me keep it. Maddie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You know he might hurt you, really hurt you. I know. And you're going anyway. I have to. His hand found hers in the darkness. For my children, for this ranch, for... He stopped. For what? For you. The words came out rough, almost angry. I can't protect you from gossip. Can't stop people talking. But I can make damn sure the man spreading those lies pays for what he's done. Maddie's breath caught. Eli. I know I've got no right. You're my employee. You came here for work, not for whatever this is. His grip on her hand tightened. But when I saw you run into that fire when I thought I might lose you, you barely knew me. I knew enough. I knew you were brave and stubborn and kind. I knew you loved my children when loving them was hard. I knew... His voice cracked. I knew you looked at Samuel without flinching, without blaming him. You were the first person who treated him like a baby instead of a curse. Tears burned in Maddie's eyes. He's just a child. None of this is his fault. I know that. I've always known that. But knowing and feeling are different things. I know. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. I lost babies too. 2 of them before they ever had a chance to breathe. My body couldn't hold them. And after... She swallowed hard. After Thomas died, I was almost relieved I hadn't given him children. Because they would have been orphans, and I would have had to watch them grieve, and I wasn't sure I could survive that. But you're here, with my children, watching them grieve every day. That's different. How? Because... She stopped searching for words that made sense. Because they're not mine. I can love them without the weight of responsibility for creating them. I can help them heal without feeling like their pain is my fault. She looked at him, her heart laid bare. I know that sounds terrible, like I'm using them to fill some hole in myself. It doesn't sound terrible. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. It sounds human. They sat in silence for a long moment, the night breathing around them. Then Elijah said, I want to see him. Who? Samuel. The name came out choked. I want to see my son. Can you bring him out here? Maddie's heart nearly stopped. Are you sure? No, but I'm tired of being sure about the wrong things. She went inside on shaking legs and lifted Samuel from his basket. He stirred, made a small sound of protest, then settled against her shoulder. When she carried him onto the porch, Elijah was standing, his hands at his sides, his face white with fear. Here. She held Samuel out. Take him. I can't. You can. She pressed the baby into his arms, giving him no choice but to accept the weight. You can. Elijah held his son. For the first time in 14 months, he held his son. Samuel's dark eyes blinked open, studying this stranger's face with the solemn intensity of babies everywhere. He reached up with one small hand and grabbed Elijah's collar. He looks like her, Elijah whispered. His voice shattered. He has her eyes, her mouth. I couldn't look at him because every time I did, I saw her dying, and I know. I'm sorry. The words weren't directed at Maddie. They were directed at the baby in his arms, at the son he'd been too broken to love. I'm so sorry, Samuel. I should have been your father, should have held you and fed you and told you every day that you were wanted, that you mattered, that losing your mama wasn't your fault. Samuel made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a word, and pressed his face against Elijah's chest. He forgives you, Maddie said softly. Babies always forgive. They don't know how to do anything else. Elijah looked at her over his son's head, tears streaming down his weathered face. I don't deserve this, he said. Any of it. You him a second chance. Maybe not, but you've got it anyway. She stepped closer, close enough to touch. Don't waste it. He reached for her with his free hand, pulling her against his side. The three of them standing together on the porch while the stars wheeled overhead and the world held its breath. Come back tomorrow, Maddie whispered against his shoulder. Whatever happens with Whitmore, you come back. These children need you. Samuel needs you. A pause. Then barely audible. You need me. Yes. The word tore out of her honest and raw. God help me, yes. His arm tightened around her. Then I'll come back. I promise. This time she believed him. Dawn came too fast. Maddie stood on the porch with Samuel in her arms, watching Elijah and Caleb ride out toward the Whitmore ranch. The other children clustered around her, silent and terrified. They'll be okay, she said, the words hollow even to her own ears. Your father knows what he's doing. Pa's never faced down Whitmore before, Rosie said quietly. Nobody has. He's too powerful. Powerful men fall all the time. They just fall harder. But the hours dragged by, and Maddie's certainty began to crack. Noon came and went. Then mid-afternoon. Then the shadows started lengthening toward evening. Something's wrong. Caleb's twin Toby, or was it Teddy, pressed against her side. They should be back by now. Maybe they're just talking, working things out. Or maybe Whitmore hurt them. Pearl's small voice was high with fear. Maybe they're dead like Mama. Don't say that. Maddie pulled the little girl close. Don't you ever say that. But her heart was racing, her mind spinning through every terrible possibility. The sound of approaching hooves made everyone freeze. 2 horses, riding fast. Maddie handed Samuel to Rosie and stepped off the porch, her hands clenched at her sides. Elijah and Caleb emerged from the dust of the road, both upright, both alive, both Maddie's breath caught. Elijah's face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. Caleb had blood on his shirt, though it didn't seem to be his own. What happened? The words came out strangled. Elijah dismounted slowly, moving like a man twice his age. Whitmore's gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? When we got there, his ranch hands met us at the gate. Said Whitmore left yesterday for Denver. Business, they claimed. Elijah's one good eye held grim satisfaction. But his wife was there, Adelaide, and she had plenty to say. About what? About her husband's plans, his obsession with Anna, the letters he'd written her for years even after we were married. Elijah's jaw tightened. The debts he'd accumulated trying to break me, the men he'd hired to cause trouble. She told you all that, why? Because she hates him. Caleb spoke up, his voice rough. She said she's been living with his obsession for 20 years, said she was tired of being second to a dead woman. She showed us everything, the forged documents, the records of payments to men who spread gossip, the plans to take our land. And the fire. She didn't know about that. But when we told her, Elijah shook his head. She broke down, said she'd suspected he was capable of it, but hadn't wanted to believe. Said she'd testify against him if it came to trial. Maddie's legs went weak with relief. So it's over. Not quite. Elijah's face darkened. Before we left, one of Whitmore's hands came at us. Said his boss had left orders if we showed up making trouble, they were to teach us a lesson. Hence the bruises. They look worse than they feel. Elijah almost smiled. Caleb handled himself well. I was impressed. Caleb ducked his head, but Maddie could see the pride in his eyes. So what now? Now we wait. Sheriff's got Adelaide's testimony. When Whitmore comes back from Denver, if he comes back, he'll have a lot to answer for. Elijah reached out and took Maddie's hand. It's not over. Men like Whitmore don't go down easy. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we've got a chance. That night, the whole family sat together for supper. All 8 of them around the table, including Samuel in a high chair. Elijah had dug out of storage and cleaned with his own hands. They passed food and shared stories and laughed at the twins' terrible jokes. And for the first time since Maddie had arrived, the house felt alive. After the children went to bed, Elijah found her on the porch. I held him again, he said quietly, settling beside her. Samuel, before bed, fed him his bottle, watched him fall asleep. How did it feel? Terrifying. He was silent for a moment. And right, like something broken finally fitting back together. I'm proud of you. Don't be. Not yet. He turned to face her. I've got a long way to go. Lot of damage to repair. Lot of trust to rebuild. We've got time. Do we? His voice dropped. Maddie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right? When this is over, when Whitmore's dealt with and the ranch is stable and the children are settled, will you stay? Her heart stuttered. Stay. Not as my housekeeper. Not as my employee. He took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. As my wife. The word hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. Eli, I know it's too fast. I know there's 100 reasons why it's a bad idea. But I almost lost you in that fire, and I realized... His voice cracked. I realized I didn't want to spend another day pretending I don't feel what I feel. What do you feel? Like I'm waking up. Like after a year of drowning, I can finally breathe again. He lifted her hand to his lips. I love you, Martha Bowen. I don't know when it happened or how it happened, but I love you. And I'm begging for a chance to prove I can be the man you deserve. Tears streamed down Maddie's face. I'm not beautiful, Eli. I'm not what men want. You're what I want. His hand cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're brave and stubborn and kind. You love my children like they're your own. You look at me like I'm worth something even when I feel worthless. That's beautiful. That's everything. People will talk. Let them. It's too soon. Then we wait. As long as you need. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him, this broken, healing man, and felt something shift inside her. A door opening. A weight lifting. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes. He kissed her, then gentle and fierce all at once, and Maddie felt the last wall around her heart crumble to dust. Behind them, from an upstairs window, came the sound of children cheering. They'd been watching the whole time. The news spread through Copper Springs faster than the fire had spread through Elijah's barn. By the time Maddie rode into town 3 days after the proposal, every eye on the main street followed her wagon. Whispers trailed behind her like smoke. Some faces held curiosity. Others held judgment. A few, and these surprised her most, held something that looked almost like approval. Mrs. Prescott met her at the general store door with a grin splitting her weathered face. Well, well. She pulled Maddie into an embrace that smelled like flower and lavender. I heard the news. About time that man came to his senses. Word travels fast. Word travels instant when it's worth telling. Mrs. Prescott released her and held her at arm's length, studying her face. You look happy. Scared, but happy. I am both those things. Good. That's how it should be. She glanced over Maddie's shoulder at the people pretending not to stare. You've got friends here, honey, more than you know. Adelaide Whitmore's testimony changed a lot of minds. People are starting to see who the real villain in this story is. And Cornelius. Any word? Mrs. Prescott's expression darkened. Still in Denver, far as anyone knows. But there's rumors he's been sending telegrams, making arrangements. She lowered her voice. Watch your back, Maddie. A man like that doesn't lose gracefully. Maddie was loading supplies into the wagon when the shadow fell across her. She looked up to find a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen too many bar fights and a smile that made her skin crawl. Mrs. Bowen? Who's asking? Name's Garrett. I work for Mr. Whitmore. His smile widened. He wanted me to deliver a message. Maddie's hands tightened on the flour sack. I'm not interested in anything Mr. Whitmore has to say. Oh, I think you will be. Garrett leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur only she could hear. Mr. Whitmore wants you to know that he hasn't forgotten about you, about the ranch, about those children. He's a patient man, Mrs. Bowen. He can wait. Wait for what? For Elijah Cartwright to fail. For you to realize you've hitched your wagon to a sinking ship. For that ranch to fall into foreclosure when the bank calls in its debts. Garrett's eyes glittered with malice. Mr. Whitmore owns that bank, by the way. Just in case you were wondering. Maddie's blood ran cold. You're lying. Am I? Ask around. Ask anyone who's tried to get a loan in this territory in the last 5 years. Whitmore's got his fingers in everything. He straightened, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. Have a nice day, ma'am, and congratulations on your engagement. I'm sure it'll be a lovely wedding while it lasts. He walked away, leaving Maddie frozen beside her wagon. The ride back to the ranch felt endless. Maddie's mind raced through every financial conversation she'd had with Elijah over the past weeks. The worried looks when he checked the ledger. The way he'd mentioned the bank loan without meeting her eyes. The repairs that never got made because there wasn't enough money. If Whitmore owned the bank, if he could call in their debts whenever he wanted, she found Elijah in what used to be the barn, sorting through salvaged tools. We need to talk. Something in her voice made him set down the hammer he'd been holding. What happened? A man named Garrett found me in town, said he works for Whitmore, said, her voice cracked, said Whitmore owns the bank that holds our loan. Elijah's face went gray. Is it true? Maddie, is it true? He was silent for a long moment, then quietly, yes. The word hit her like a physical blow. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because I hoped I could fix it before you found out. Because... He ran his hands through his hair, his expression anguished. Because I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like I've failed you, like I've trapped you in something you can't escape. You haven't trapped me in anything. Maddie stepped closer, grabbing his arms and forcing him to meet her eyes. But you have to stop keeping secrets. If we're going to survive this, if we're going to build something together, I need to know what we're facing. We're facing ruin. The words came out flat, defeated. I took out that loan 2 years ago to buy cattle. Anna was pregnant with Samuel, and I thought if I could just expand the herd, we'd have enough to secure the children's future. But then she died, and I stopped caring about anything. And now? How much do we owe? $800. Due in 6 months. Maddie's stomach dropped. $800. It might as well have been 8,000. We'll find a way, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. We'll sell some cattle, take on extra work. There has to be something. There's nothing. Elijah's voice was hollow. The cattle we have left are barely worth half that. The land's in drought. Nobody's hiring extra hands when they can barely feed their own. He laughed bitterly. Whitmore planned this. He's been planning it for years, waiting for me to fail so he could swoop in and take everything. Then we don't give him the satisfaction. How? Maddie didn't have an answer, but she refused to let despair win. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the ranch's ledger open in front of her, going over the numbers again and again, looking for something, anything that might offer a way out. The door creaked. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his hair rumpled from sleep. You're still up. So are you. He crossed to the table and slid into the chair across from her. I heard you and Pa talking earlier, about the bank. You shouldn't eavesdrop. And you shouldn't lie awake worrying about things you can't control. He nodded at the ledger. Any answers in there? Not yet. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Ma used to do that. Stay up all night trying to solve problems. Pa would find her asleep at this table and the morning papers spread everywhere. Did she ever find solutions? Sometimes. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She used to say that problems were just puzzles with missing pieces. You had to keep looking until you found the piece that made everything fit. Smart woman. She was. Caleb's voice softened. She would have liked you. I think she would have been glad Pa found someone who could love us the way she did. Tears pricked at Maddie's eyes. That means a lot, Caleb. I know I wasn't welcoming when you first came. I was angry and scared and... He stopped, swallowed. I'm not anymore. Angry, I mean. I'm still scared, but I'm glad you're here. We all are. I'm glad I'm here too. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We'll figure this out. Together. That's what families do, right? Right, Maddie whispered. That's what families do. The answer came from the most unexpected place. Adelaide Whitmore rode up to the ranch 2 days later, alone, her expensive dress dusty from the road and her face set with determination. Elijah met her in the yard with his hand resting near his hip where his gun would be if he'd been wearing it. What do you want? To help. Adelaide's voice was steady, but her hands trembled on the reins. I know what Cornelius is planning. The bank loan, the foreclosure. I know he's trying to take everything from you. And why would you help us? Because I'm tired. The words came out raw, broken. Tired of watching him destroy people. Tired of being married to a man who's never loved me, who spent 20 years pining for a dead woman. Tired of pretending I don't see the evil he does. Maddie had come out onto the porch, Samuel on her hip. Mrs. Whitmore, Adelaide, please. She turned to face Maddie, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. I have money. My own money from my father's estate. Cornelius doesn't know about it. I've kept it hidden for years, waiting for a chance to escape. We can't take your money, Elijah said flatly. You can, and you will. Adelaide's voice hardened. Consider it restitution for everything my husband has done. Consider it revenge if that makes it easier to swallow. But I'm offering you $800 to pay off that loan and free yourself from his control." "Why?" "Because Anna Cartwright was kind to me." Adelaide's voice cracked. "When I first came to this territory as a new bride, terrified and alone, she was the only person who treated me like a human being instead of a prize Cornelius had won. She invited me to her home. She taught me to cook, to garden, to survive in this harsh land." Tears streamed down her face. "And my husband repaid that kindness by obsessing over her for 2 decades by trying to destroy her family after her death. I won't let him succeed. I can't." Elijah was silent for a long moment. Then Maddie said quietly, "Anna would want us to accept." He looked at her, his expression torn. "She would want her children protected," Maddie continued. "She would want this family to survive. Pride is a luxury we can't afford right now." Another long silence. Then Elijah nodded slowly. "All right," he said roughly. "But this isn't charity. It's a loan. I'll pay back every cent. However you want to frame it." Adelaide reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. "It's all here. $800 in gold coin. Enough to pay off the bank and start fresh." She handed the pouch to Elijah. Their hands touched briefly, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. "What will you do now?" Maddie asked. "When Cornelius finds out." "He won't find out. Not until I'm long gone." Adelaide straightened her shoulders. "I'm leaving him. Tonight. I've arranged passage to San Francisco, where I have cousins who will take me in. By the time Cornelius returns from Denver, I'll be halfway across the territory. He'll come after you. Let him try." A fierce smile crossed Adelaide's face. "I've been his victim for 20 years. I'm done being afraid." She rode away without looking back. Maddie and Elijah stood in the yard, watching her disappear, the weight of $800 heavy in his hands. "I don't know whether to be relieved or terrified," Elijah said finally. "Be both." Maddie leaned against his side. "That's how this whole journey has felt." He wrapped his arm around her. "At least we're not facing it alone." The next weeks passed in a blur of rebuilding and preparation. Elijah paid off the bank loan the very next day, taking grim satisfaction in the shock on the banker's face when he slapped the gold coins on the counter. Word spread quickly the Cartwright ranch was free and clear, and Cornelius Whitmore's carefully laid plans had crumbled to dust. The community response was overwhelming. Neighbors who had kept their distance during the gossip started showing up with offers of help. Men arrived with lumber and tools to rebuild the barn. Women brought food and supplies and stayed to help Maddie with the endless work of keeping a household running. Children came to play with the twins, and Pearl filling the ranch with laughter that had been absent for too long. "I don't understand," Rosie said one evening, watching a group of neighbors raise barn walls in the fading light. "These same people were whispering about us a month ago. What changed?" "They saw who the real enemy was," Maddie said. "Sometimes people need to witness evil before they can recognize good." "That's a sad way to look at it." "Maybe. But it's also hopeful. It means people can change their minds, can choose better." The barn was finished in 2 weeks. It wasn't as large as the old one, but it was solid and well built, a testament to community and cooperation. On the day the last nail was driven, Elijah gathered everyone for a celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food that Maddie and the other women had been preparing for days. Music drifted through the warm evening air. Children ran laughing through the grass while adults talked and ate and celebrated survival. Sheriff Barlow pulled Elijah aside as the sun began to set. "Got word from Denver," he said quietly. "Whitmore's been arrested." Elijah went still. "For what?" "Fraud. Embezzlement. Turns out he's been skimming from his own businesses for years, paying off debts with money that wasn't his. When Adelaide's testimony reached the authorities, they started digging, found a whole nest of crimes going back a decade." So he's not coming back. Not for a long time, if ever. Barlow clapped Elijah on the shoulder. It's over, Eli. You can stop looking over your shoulder. Elijah found Maddie in the crowd and pulled her close. It's over, he whispered against her hair. Whitmore's been arrested. He's not coming back. She sagged against him, months of tension finally releasing. Are you sure? Barlow just told me. Multiple charges. He'll be in prison for years. Maddie lifted her face to his, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's really over. It's really over. He kissed her then, right there in front of everyone, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The wedding was set for 2 weeks later. Maddie had wanted something simple, just family and a few close friends, but the community had other ideas. Word spread that Elijah Cartwright was finally getting married, and suddenly everyone wanted to be part of the celebration. The day before the ceremony, Maddie found herself alone in the kitchen, overwhelmed by everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. Rosie appeared in the doorway. You okay? Just nervous. Maddie laughed shakily. I've been married before, but this feels different. Bigger. Because you love him. I loved Thomas too. But did you choose him? Rosie crossed the kitchen and took Maddie's hands. Ma used to say there's a difference between falling into love and walking into it with your eyes open. Falling is easy. Walking takes courage. Your mother was very wise. She was, and she would have loved you. Rosie squeezed her hands. We all love you. The twins Pearl Samuel, even Caleb, though he'd rather die than admit it. You gave us back our family. You gave us back our pa. Maddie pulled the girl into a fierce embrace. You gave me back my heart. I'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. You belong here. With us. Forever. Forever, Maddie whispered. I like the sound of that. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Maddie dressed in a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Prescott had insisted on lending her, finer than anything she'd ever owned, but somehow still practical. Still her. Rosie braided wildflowers into her hair, while Pearl supervised, offering suggestions that were mostly impractical, but always delivered with absolute seriousness. You look beautiful, Rosie said when she was finished. Maddie looked at her reflection, and for once didn't flinch. She didn't see a plain woman past her prime. She saw someone loved, someone wanted, someone who had fought for this moment and won. I feel beautiful, she said softly. For the first time in my life, I actually feel beautiful. The ceremony took place under a spreading oak tree that Anna had planted when she first came to the ranch as a bride. It seemed fitting, a blessing from one wife to another, a passing of the torch from the woman who had loved this family first to the woman who would love them now. Elijah stood waiting, his dark hair combed back, his face clean-shaven for the first time since Maddie had met him. When he saw her walking toward him with Samuel in her arms, his eyes filled with tears. You came, he whispered when she reached him. Of course I came. She smiled through her own tears. I promised, didn't I? The preacher's words washed over her in a blur. She barely heard them all. She could focus on was Elijah's face, his hands holding hers, the warmth of Samuel between them. When the moment came for vows, Elijah spoke first. Martha Bowen, you walked into my broken house with nothing but a skillet and a stubborn heart. You loved my children when I couldn't. You saved them from a fire. You saved me from myself. His voice cracked. I don't know what I did to deserve a second chance, but I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it. Then it was her turn. Elijah Cartwright, you hired me to cook and clean. You didn't ask for my heart, but I gave it anyway. Maddie's voice trembled. I came here looking for work and found a family. Found a home. Found a man brave enough to let himself heal even when healing hurt. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here. That's all I've ever needed. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Elijah kissed her, and the world disappeared. When they finally pulled apart, their children surrounded them, Caleb with his arm around Rosie, the twins bouncing with excitement, Pearl clinging to Maddie's skirt, Samuel reaching for his father with chubby hands. "We did it," Elijah said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're a family, a real family." "We were always a family," Maddie corrected gently. "We just made it official." The celebration lasted until the stars came out. Late that night, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Maddie and Elijah stood together on the porch where everything had begun. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "More than I knew I could be." "Scared?" "Always." She leaned into his warmth. "But the good kind of scared. The kind that means something matters." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Martha Cartwright." "I love you too, Elijah." She smiled into the darkness. "I love you too." Behind them, the house settled and sighed, full of sleeping children and new beginnings. The cast-iron skillet hung in its place of honor in the kitchen, a reminder of where Maddie had started and how far she had come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new reasons to fight for this family she had chosen. But tonight, there was only peace, and that was enough. The first month of marriage passed like a dream Maddie was afraid to wake from. She learned the rhythm of sharing a bed with someone after years of sleeping alone. Learned how Elijah mumbled in his sleep, how he reached for her in the darkness like he was afraid she might vanish. Learned the particular joy of waking up next to someone who wanted her there. The children adjusted faster than she'd expected. They started calling her Ma within 2 weeks, Pearl first, then the twins, then Rosie. Even Caleb slipped once, then turned red and stammered an apology that Maddie silenced with a hug. "You can call me whatever you want," she told him, "but I'd be honored if you called me Ma." Samuel was the easiest. He'd never known any other mother. To him, Maddie had always been the woman who held him when he cried, who fed him when he was hungry, who loved him without hesitation or reservation. And Elijah was learning to be a father again. He came to every meal now, helped with homework in the evenings, read to Pearl and Samuel before bed. He and Caleb worked side by side in the fields, their silence slowly transforming from distance into companionship. "You've changed him," Rosie said one morning, watching her father carry Samuel on his shoulders, while the twins ran circles around them. "He changed himself," Maddie corrected. "I just gave him a reason to try." The test came 6 weeks after the wedding. Maddie was in the kitchen making breakfast when the cramping started. She gripped the edge of the counter, breathing through the familiar pain, the familiar fear. She'd felt this before, twice. Both times it had ended in blood and loss, and a grief so deep she'd thought she'd drown in it. "Maddie?" Elijah's voice came from the doorway. "You're white as a sheet. What's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're lying." He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Tell me." "I think," her voice cracked, "I think I might be pregnant." His face went blank with shock. "Pregnant? I'm not sure, but the signs—" She pressed her hand to her stomach. "I've felt this before, twice. Both times I lost the baby before it ever had a chance to live." "Maddie." "I'm scared, Eli." The words tore out of her raw and desperate. "I'm so scared it's happening again. That my body will fail like it always does. That I'll disappoint you the way I disappointed Thomas." "You didn't disappoint anyone." His hands cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Losing a baby isn't failure. It's tragedy. There's a difference. But if I can't give you children, I have 5 children. They're yours now too." His voice was fierce. "I didn't marry you to breed Maddie. I married you because I love you. Because my children love you. Because this family isn't complete without you." "But—" "No buts." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Whatever happens, we face it together. If there's a baby, we'll welcome it. If there isn't, we'll grieve together. But you're not going through this alone. Not ever again." She broke down sobbing against his chest. The doctor came that afternoon, a gruff man named Harrison, who'd delivered half the babies in the territory and lost more than a few along the way. He examined Maddie with clinical efficiency, asked questions, she answered through tears, and finally sat back with a sigh. "You're pregnant," he confirmed. "About 6 weeks along, I'd guess. Will I lose it?" "I can't promise you won't." Harrison's voice was gentle but honest. "Your history makes this a higher risk pregnancy. But there are things we can do. Rest, proper nutrition, avoiding heavy lifting. The body's a mysterious thing, Mrs. Cartwright. Sometimes it surprises us." After he left, Maddie lay in bed with Elijah beside her, staring at the ceiling. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "I know. Me too. What if—" "Stop." He rolled onto his side, facing her. "No what ifs. We're not going to spend the next 8 months preparing for disaster. We're going to hope. We're going to pray. We're going to trust that whatever happens, we can survive it." "You really believe that?" "I have to." He laced his fingers through hers. "I've spent the last year and a half preparing for the worst, expecting it, living in fear of losing anyone else I love. And you know what? The worst came anyway. The fire. Whitmore almost losing this ranch. It all came regardless of how much I worried." His voice roughened. "But so did the good things. You. A second chance. A family that's whole again. I can't control what happens, Maddie. I can only control how I face it." "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from a stubborn woman who ran into a burning barn to save horses that weren't hers." She laughed through her tears. "That woman sounds like an idiot." "That woman sounds like someone worth loving." He kissed her forehead. "Now rest. Doctor's orders." The children found out within days. Rosie noticed first the way Maddie moved more carefully, the way Elijah hovered protectively, the way certain foods suddenly made her turn green. "Are you having a baby?" The question came at dinner, blunt and direct, and the whole table went silent. Maddie looked at Elijah. He nodded slightly. "We might be," she said carefully. "It's early, and we don't know for certain that everything will be okay. But yes, there might be a baby." Pearl squealed with excitement. The twins started arguing about whether it would be a boy or a girl. Even Caleb looked pleased, though he tried to hide it behind his usual stoic expression. Only Rosie stayed quiet. "What is it, sweetheart?" Maddie asked. "Nothing." The girl's voice was too bright, too quick. "I'm happy, really." But later, when the others were in bed, Rosie found Maddie on the porch. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice small. "And you're going to think I'm awful." "I could never think you're awful." "When you said there might be a baby," Rosie's face crumpled. "I felt jealous. For just a second I felt jealous because you're going to love this baby more than us, more than me. And then I felt horrible for thinking that, and I don't know what's wrong with me." Maddie pulled the girl down beside her on the porch step. "Nothing's wrong with you? Jealousy is a normal feeling, especially when you've already lost so much. But you're not going to love this baby more. Are you?" "No, I'm not." Maddie took Rosie's face in her hands. "Love isn't pie, Rosie. It doesn't get divided up so there's less for everyone. Every child who comes into my heart makes it bigger, not smaller. I love you and Caleb and the twins and Pearl and Samuel. If this baby survives, I'll love them too. But not more. Not instead of. Just. Also. Promise. I promise." She kissed the girl's forehead. "You were my first daughter, Rosie. The first one who trusted me enough to let me help. That means something. That will always mean something." Rosie collapsed against her, crying with relief. The months that followed were the longest of Maddie's life. Every twinge made her freeze. Every morning she woke up checking for blood. Every week that passed without disaster felt like a miracle she didn't deserve. Elijah was her rock. He took over most of the heavy chores, insisted she rest during the hottest parts of the day, held her through the nights when fear kept her from sleeping. He talked to the baby growing inside her, his hand pressed against her swelling stomach, his voice low and tender. "You stay put, little one," he'd murmur. "Your mama's worked hard for you. Don't you dare give up." The children helped too. Caleb started doing Maddie's share of the barn work without being asked. Rosie took over most of the cooking, following recipes Maddie supervised from a chair at the kitchen table. The twins stopped roughhousing inside, moving their chaos outdoors, where it couldn't jostle their new sibling. Even Pearl learned to be gentle, patting Maddie's belly with careful hands and whispering secrets to the baby inside. At 4 months, Maddie felt the first flutter of movement. She was sitting on the porch shelling peas when it happened, a tiny ripple like butterfly wings against the inside of her stomach. She dropped the pea pod and pressed both hands to her belly, holding her breath. There it was again, unmistakable. "Eli!" Her voice cracked. "Eli, come here." He burst through the door like the house was on fire. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is it? Give me your hand." She pressed his palm flat against her stomach and waited. The flutter came again, stronger this time. Elijah's face transformed. Shock, then wonder, then a joy so pure it made him look 20 years younger. "That's our baby," he whispered. "That's our baby moving." "Yes." Tears streamed down her face. "Yes, it is." He fell to his knees beside her chair and wrapped his arms around her. His face pressed against her belly, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "Thank you," he said against her dress. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She didn't know if he was talking to her, to God, or to the tiny life growing inside her. It didn't matter. She stroked his hair and cried along with him, letting herself believe for the first time that this might actually work, that she might actually get to keep this one. The pregnancy continued. 5 months, 6, 7. Maddie grew round and slow, her body changing in ways it never had before. She'd always been large, but now she was massive, a mountain of a woman who waddled more than walked and needed help getting out of chairs. "I look ridiculous," she said one evening, catching sight of herself in the bedroom mirror. Elijah came up behind her, wrapping his arms around what was left of her waist. "You look beautiful." "I look like I swallowed a watermelon." "You look like you're growing our child." He pressed a kiss to her neck. "There's nothing more beautiful than that." She turned in his arms, searching his face for any sign of the disgust she'd always expected from men. She found only love. "How can you still want me, looking like this?" "How could I not?" His hands moved over her swollen belly, gentle and reverent. "You're giving me something I thought I'd never have again, a child with a woman I love. A chance to be the father I should have been from the start." His voice dropped. "With Samuel, I was so consumed by grief that I missed everything. His first smile, his first word, his first steps. I told myself I didn't deserve to witness those moments, that Anna's death was my punishment for not being there when she needed me. And now I know that was just fear talking. Fear and guilt and a grief so big I couldn't see past it." He cupped her face in his hands. "You helped me see past it, Maddie. You taught me that loving someone doesn't mean betraying Anna's memory. It means honoring it, living the kind of life she'd have wanted for me, for our children. She'd be proud of you." "I hope so." He kissed her softly. "I'm trying to be someone she'd be proud of. Someone you can be proud of." "I already am." The labor started 3 weeks before the baby was due. Maddie woke in the darkness with a familiar cramping, her nightgown soaked, fear clawing at her throat. "Eli." She shook him awake. "Eli, it's time." He was out of bed in an instant, pulling on clothes, shouting for Caleb to ride for the doctor. "It's too early." Maddie gasped between contractions. "The baby's coming too early." "Babies come when they want to come." Elijah's voice was steady, but his hands shook as he helped her sit up. "Our job is to be ready." The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and fear. Dr. Harrison arrived as dawn broke his face grave when he examined her. Baby's in position. We can't stop this now, even if we wanted to. Is it going to be okay? I don't know. He squeezed her hand. But I know you're strong. I know this baby has a fighter for a mother. That counts for something. The labor was long and brutal. Maddie screamed until her throat was raw. She gripped Elijah's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers. She pushed and rested and pushed again, her body doing something it had never successfully done before, terrified that at any moment it would fail her like it always had. I can't, she sobbed at one point. I can't do this. It's too hard. Yes, you can. Elijah's face was inches from hers, his eyes burning with fierce determination. You ran into a fire for my children. You faced down gossip and threats and a man who wanted to destroy us. You are the bravest woman I've ever known, and you can do this. What if? No what ifs. Remember, just hope, just trust, just push. She pushed, and pushed, and pushed, and then finally, a cry split the air. It's a girl, Dr. Harrison announced, his voice thick with emotion. A healthy, screaming, beautiful baby girl. Maddie reached for her daughter with trembling arms. She was tiny, so tiny it seemed impossible she could survive. But her lungs were strong, her cry was loud, and when Maddie pressed her against her chest, she felt the fierce flutter of a heartbeat that refused to stop. Hello, little one, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm your mama. I've been waiting for you my whole life. Elijah leaned over them both, his own tears falling onto Maddie's hair. She's perfect, he said brokenly. She's absolutely perfect. What should we name her? He was silent for a moment, then quietly. What about Anna? After? No. Maddie shook her head. Your Anna deserves her own memory, separate and sacred. This baby deserves her own name too. Then you choose. Maddie looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair already curling against her pink skull, the fierce grip of miniature fingers wrapped around her thumb. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope. Because that's what she is. That's what this whole family is. A hope I didn't know I was allowed to have. Elijah kissed them both, his wife, his daughter, and whispered, Hope, perfect. The children met their new sister that afternoon. They crowded into the bedroom, their faces a mixture of excitement and awe, their voices hushed in the presence of something so small and miraculous. Pearl reached out one tentative finger to touch Hope's cheek. She's so tiny. You were that tiny once? Maddie said with a smile. Was I? Pearl looked skeptical. I don't remember. Nobody remembers being a baby. That's what families are for, to remember for you. Rosie held Hope next her 12-year-old arms, steady and sure. She'd had practice with Samuel, but this was different. This was the first baby she'd held who wasn't burdened by the shadow of their mother's death. She looks like you, Ma, Rosie said softly, around the eyes. You think so? I know so. Rosie kissed Hope's forehead. Welcome to the family, little sister. It's a good one. Took us a while to figure that out, but we did. Caleb was last. He stood at the edge of the bed, his hands jammed in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral. Do you want to hold her? Maddie asked. I'm not good with babies. Neither was your father. He learned. Caleb's jaw worked. Then slowly, he reached out and let Maddie place Hope in his arms. The baby looked up at him with unfocused eyes, her tiny mouth working. Something cracked in Caleb's expression. The wall he'd built, the anger and grief and fear he'd been carrying for nearly 2 years, finally crumbled. Hey there, Hope, he whispered roughly. I'm your big brother. I know I don't look like much, but I promise. His voice broke. I promise I'll protect you. No matter what, I'll be there when you need me. I won't let you down the way I... He couldn't finish. The tears came silent and fierce as he held his baby sister and finally let himself grieve for everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. Maddie reached out and touched his cheek. "You never let anyone down, Caleb. You were a child carrying an impossible burden. It's time to let that go." "I don't know how." "Start by loving her. The rest will follow." He nodded, still crying, and pressed a kiss to Hope's forehead. That night, after the children were asleep and Hope was nestled in a cradle beside the bed, Maddie lay in Elijah's arms and tried to absorb everything that had happened. "I never thought I'd have this," she said quietly. "A husband who loves me. Children who need me. A baby of my own. And yet here you are. Here I am." She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. "I spent so many years believing I wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not thin enough, not worthy enough. My mother-in-law used to tell me that Thomas had settled for me because he couldn't do better. I believed her. She was wrong. I know that now, but for a long time I didn't." She turned her face to look at him. "You showed me something different. You and the children. You showed me that worth isn't about what you look like or what you can produce. It's about showing up, staying, fighting for the people you love even when it's hard. You taught me the same thing." Elijah's voice was rough. "I was so lost when you came here, so convinced that I'd failed everyone I loved. You didn't try to fix me, you just kept showing up, kept cooking and cleaning and caring, kept treating my children like they mattered, kept looking at Samuel without flinching. He's easy to love. Not for me, not then, but you showed me how." He pulled her closer. "You showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end, that broken things can be mended, that it's possible to love again after losing everything." "We saved each other," Maddie whispered. "Yeah, we did." From the cradle, Hope made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a sigh of contentment. They both turned to look at her, this tiny miracle they'd created together. "She's going to have a good life," Elijah said. "Better than ours, better than we dared to hope for ourselves. She's going to have a family that loves her. That's better than anything." "Yes, it is." Silence settled over them, warm and peaceful. Then Maddie said, "The skillet. What about it?" "My mother gave it to me before she died. Told me that as long as I could cook, I could survive. That my worth was in what I could do, not how I looked." She smiled in the darkness. "I believed her for a long time. Used that skillet to cook my way through grief and loneliness and poverty. It was my anchor, the one thing I refused to sell, no matter how desperate things got. And now I understand what she really meant." Maddie's voice softened. "It wasn't about the skillet. It was about having something to offer, something to give. She knew I had more than cooking skills. I had love waiting to be given to someone who needed it. The skillet was just a symbol, a reminder that I was worth more than I believed." "You're worth everything. So are you, Elijah Cartwright." She kissed him softly. "So are you." The years that followed brought challenges, as years always do. Droughts and blizzards, illness and injury, children growing up too fast, and arguments that lasted longer than they should have. Caleb left for college, the first Cartwright to ever go, and Rosie fell in love with a rancher's son from the next county. The twins caused trouble wherever they went, and Pearl grew into a stubborn young woman with her mother's fierce heart. Samuel never remembered a time when Maddie wasn't his mother. When he was old enough to understand that she wasn't his birth mother, he shrugged and said, "Doesn't matter. You're my ma. That's all I need to know." Hope grew strong and healthy, defying every fear Maddie had carried during those terrifying months of pregnancy. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength, and she loved her siblings with a ferocity that made Maddie's heart ache with pride. And through it all, through every hardship and every triumph, the Cartwright family stayed together. They ate breakfast together every morning and dinner together every night. They celebrated birthdays and mourned losses and built something that couldn't be destroyed by fire or gossip or the cruelty of small-minded men. 20 years after Maddie first arrived at Dusty Creek Ranch with nothing but a cast-iron skillet and a desperate hope for belonging, she stood on the porch and watched her grandchildren playing in the yard. Elijah came up behind her, his hair now fully gray, his body slower than it used to be, but his arms around her still as strong and sure as they'd been on their wedding day. "Happy?" he asked, his voice a familiar rumble against her ear. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "Any regrets?" She thought about the question seriously. The losses she'd endured, the fears she'd faced, the years of believing she wasn't enough. "Not one," she said finally. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me here. To you. To this family. To a life I never thought I deserved. You deserve everything. I have everything." She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she'd loved for 2 decades. "I have you." He kissed her, then the way he'd kissed her 1,000 times before. Tender and fierce, and full of a love that had only grown stronger with time. Inside the house, the cast-iron skillet hung in its place of honor. 5 generations of women had cooked in that skillet, had survived in it, had found their worth through what they could offer. But Maddie had discovered something her mother never told her. The skillet wasn't what made her valuable. The cooking wasn't what made her worthy. What made her enough, what had always made her enough, was her capacity to love fiercely, stay stubbornly, and choose her family over and over again, even when choosing was hard. She'd come to this ranch as a hired cook. She'd stay as a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and the heart of a family that would endure for generations. That was her legacy. That was her truth, and that truth would never change.